I want to tell you something before we begin. I spent 41 years running into burning buildings, 41 years carrying people out on my back, breathing smoke so thick it turned the sky black at noon, making decisions in seconds that other people couldn't make in a lifetime. I thought I knew what fear felt like. I thought I'd already seen the worst that life could throw at a man. I was wrong, because nothing, not one fire, not one collapsed roof, not one moment where I thought I might not make it out alive, nothing in all those years prepared me for the morning I discovered that my own son had stolen everything I had. Not just the money, not just the house, everything. The savings I'd built dollar by dollar since I was 22 years old, the home where I raised him, the future I had quietly, carefully arranged so that I wouldn't be a burden to anyone. Gone. All of it. Gone. And the man who took it? He was sitting 3 states away, probably drinking his morning coffee, never once looking back. My name is Robert Callahan. I'm 68 years old. I'm a retired firefighter from a small town in central Ohio, and this is the story of how I lost everything and then chose to stand back up. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you love, this story is for you. But I need you to understand something right from the start. This isn't a story about hatred. It's not about rage, though Lord knows I've felt plenty of it. This is a story about what a man does when the ground falls out from under him, and whether he decides to keep walking anyway. I decided to keep walking, and that was just the beginning of my plan.
Let me take you back to a Tuesday morning in October. The leaves were turning that particular shade of amber that Ohio does better than anywhere else in the country, that deep, honest gold that makes you feel, just for a moment, like everything in the world is exactly where it should be. I remember standing on my front porch with a cup of coffee, watching the maple in the yard do what it had done every autumn for the 32 years I'd lived in that house. I remember thinking, this is enough. This, right here, is enough. My wife Carol had passed 2 years before, breast cancer. She was gone in 11 months from the diagnosis, 11 months that I would trade anything to have back, and also 11 months I am grateful I had. We said everything we needed to say to each other. We held hands through the hard parts. She went peacefully on a Wednesday morning in May, with the window open and a breeze coming in from the garden she had tended since the kids were small. After she passed, I made a decision. I was going to simplify. Sell the house, maybe. It was too big for one man anyway. Move into something smaller, put the retirement money somewhere safe, and spend whatever years I had left being useful, volunteering, fishing, watching my grandson Danny grow up into something worth admiring. My son Michael had other ideas. "Dad," he said one afternoon, sitting across from me at the kitchen table, the same table where he'd done his homework as a boy, "I want to talk to you about something. A real opportunity." I looked at him. Michael was 41 then, handsome in the way Carol had been handsome, good bones, easy smile, the kind of face that made people lean in when he talked. He had always been charming. I had always loved that about him. I had not yet learned to be careful of it. "An opportunity," I repeated. "A commercial real estate expansion. The market is right, Dad, and I've already got 2 partners lined up. I just need a little more capital to make the numbers work." I asked him how much. He smiled the way he always smiled when he wanted something, warm, unhurried, like the answer was obvious and there was nothing to worry about. "If we consolidate the property, put it in both our names temporarily, we can leverage it. You'd be a co-owner. You'd profit directly." "Michael," I said slowly, "you're talking about the house. I'm talking about our future, Dad, yours and mine and Danny's. One smart move now and we set the family up for the next 20 years. I want to tell you what I was thinking in that moment. I want to be honest with you because that's the only way this story means anything. I was thinking about Carol. about how she used to say that Michael just needed the right chance, that underneath all the restlessness and the big ideas, there was a good man trying to find his footing. I was thinking about Danny, my grandson, 7 years old, with Carol's same dark eyes and a laugh that could fill a room. I was thinking that I was 68 years old and I had worked my whole life so that the people I loved would be taken care of. And here was my son, sitting at my kitchen table, asking me to finally let that work matter. So I signed. I signed the consolidation documents. I signed the transfer forms. I signed what Michael told me was a temporary co-ownership agreement. He had a notary come to the house, a young woman with a pleasant face who stamped everything efficiently and never met my eyes. 3 weeks later, I called the bank about a routine matter and was told that the account was closed. Closed? I said. What do you mean closed? Sir, the account was closed on the 14th. The funds were transferred per the authorization we received. I sat down very slowly on the edge of my bed. What authorization? I asked. Who authorized it? There was a pause. Then, Sir, you did.
If you've ever been betrayed by someone you love, you know that the first thing you feel isn't anger, it's confusion. Pure, disorienting confusion, the kind that makes the room tilt sideways, the kind that makes you pick up the phone and put it down 3 times before you dial, because some part of your brain keeps insisting that there must be a mistake, that the person you raised, the person you held as an infant in this very house, could not have done what the evidence says he did. There must be an explanation. There must be something you're missing. I called Michael 18 times over 3 days. 18 times, I counted. He picked up once, on the second day, just long enough for me to hear his voice say, "Dad, I can't talk right now. I'll call you back." And then nothing. His wife didn't answer. His cell went to voicemail. The business address he'd given me turned out to be a mail forwarding service in Columbus. By the end of the week, I had spoken to a real estate attorney, and I understood what had happened. The house had been sold. A buyer had been lined up before Michael ever sat down at my kitchen table. The consolidation agreement I'd signed hadn't made me a co-owner. It had transferred primary title authority to Michael, and he had exercised that authority the day after we signed. The retirement funds, transferred per my authorization, had moved through 2 accounts and were gone. I was left with my truck, my personal belongings, and $412 in a checking account that hadn't been part of the transfer. The attorney, a kind man named Gerald who charged me nothing for that first consultation, God bless him, looked at me across his desk and said carefully, "Mr. Callahan, I have to tell you, this is not the first time I've seen something like this. But the fact that it was your son—" He stopped. He didn't need to finish the sentence. I spent 2 weeks in a shelter. I want you to sit with that for a moment because I think it matters. 68 years old, 41 years of service, a man who had run into fires for a living, and I was sleeping in a cot in a community shelter, eating meals served by volunteers, lying awake at 3 in the morning listening to other men cry quietly in the dark. I am not ashamed of it, but I want you to know that it happened, because I think sometimes people hear a story like this and they imagine the betrayal as something abstract, a legal problem, a financial setback. They don't picture the cot. They don't picture folding your clothes into a bin bag because there's nowhere else to put them. That's where I was when Henry Briggs found me. Henry and I had come up together in the department back in the 80s. He'd left firefighting after 10 years to go to law school, something I'd teased him about mercilessly for 3 decades, and he'd built a quiet, solid practice in family and civil law just outside Dayton. Someone had called him, a mutual friend from the old crew, and Henry showed up at that shelter on a rainy Thursday morning with 2 coffees and a yellow legal pad and sat down across from me like we were just 2 old friends catching up. "Tell me everything," he said. So I did. Henry listened for 2 hours without interrupting. He wrote things down. He asked 3 precise questions, and then he set down his pen and looked at me with an expression I recognized from our fireground days.
that particular stillness a man gets when the situation is serious but not yet lost. "Robert, your son has done this before." The words landed like a weight. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Henry said evenly, "that I've already found 2 other cases. Different states, different victims, same structure. Co-ownership consolidation, title transfer, account authorization. He's refined the approach. You weren't the first." I looked at my hands for a long moment. I'd taught Michael to ride a bike in the driveway of that house. I'd sat up with him through fevers and nightmares and the particular misery of being 16 and heartbroken for the first time. I'd given the toast at his wedding and cried, actually cried, because I was so proud of the man I thought he'd become. "How many?" I asked. "That I've confirmed? 4. There may be more." The confusion was gone now. The grief was still there. It would be there for a long time. But underneath it, something else was rising. Something quieter and more determined. "What do we do?" I said. Henry picked up his pen. "We build a case, and then we make sure he can't do it to anyone else." I nodded slowly. "Anger is a fire too. I know fires, and I know that the worst thing you can do with a fire is let it burn without direction. We were going to direct this one very carefully."
It took us 4 months. 4 months of careful, methodical work. Henry pulled records. I made calls, quietly, patiently, one lead at a time, to the other people Michael had defrauded. Most of them didn't want to talk at first. People who've been scammed, especially people who were scammed by someone they trusted, are often ashamed. They feel foolish. They don't want to say it out loud. I told each of them the same thing. "I'm his father," I said, "and he did the same thing to me. You have nothing to be ashamed of. Neither do I. But if we don't do something together, he'll do it to someone else next month." One by one, they agreed to talk. There was a retired school teacher from Indiana named Patricia, 64 years old, who had lost her late husband's life insurance settlement. There was a couple from Kentucky, the Warrens, both in their 70s, who had signed over a parcel of land they'd owned for 40 years. There was a widower in Michigan named Gus, who didn't say much during our call, but sent Henry a meticulous envelope of documents 2 days later with a note that said simply, "Do what you need to do." And there was me. Meanwhile, Henry had discovered something else. Michael was setting up again. A new state, Tennessee this time, a new LLC, and he was organizing what he called a private investment seminar, a presentation for potential investors in a commercial development project that Henry was virtually certain did not exist. "He's already circulating invitations," Henry said, "targeting people through a seniors financial network. The event is in 6 weeks." I was quiet for a moment. "Can we get into that room?" I asked. Henry looked at me carefully. "I can arrange for you to receive an invitation through a proxy contact, but Robert, if you're thinking about confronting him publicly—" "I'm thinking about making sure there are witnesses," I said, "and a recording, and that the people in that room don't become his next set of victims." Henry was quiet. "That's not revenge, that's prevention." He picked up his pen. "I'll make the call." If you've ever been betrayed by someone you love, you know there's a moment when the pain stops being the loudest thing in the room, when something steadier takes over. Not coldness, not hatred, but a kind of clarity, a sense of purpose so clean it almost feels like peace. That was the month I started sleeping again. The seminar was held on a Friday evening in March in a hotel conference room in Nashville, 63-seat capacity. From what Henry had gathered, Michael was expecting 30 to 40 attendees, older investors mostly, recruited through the Seniors Network with promises of 15% annual returns on a mixed-use development in a high-growth corridor. I arrived early. I wore my good blazer, the navy one Carol had picked out for our anniversary dinner the year before she got sick. I sat in the 3rd row, near the center. I had a digital recorder in my breast pocket and a folder of documents on my lap. Michael walked in at 7:15. He looked good. That was the first thing I noticed, and I'll be honest with you, it hit me harder than I expected. He'd had a haircut.
He was wearing a suit I didn't recognize. He smiled at people as he moved through the room, working the crowd the way he'd always worked a room, easy and warm and full of that particular energy that makes people feel like they're already in on something good. He hadn't seen me yet. I was 3 rows back, and the lighting near the front was bright enough that the audience was probably a soft blur to him. He stepped to the podium. He began to speak, and I sat and listened to my son, stand in front of 41 people and describe, in careful and enthusiastic detail, an investment opportunity that Henry had confirmed did not exist. I listened to him quote returns. I listened to him show slides. I listened to him use words like legacy and security and generational wealth, words that he knew, because I had taught him, that older people respond to, words that meant something real once, before he learned to weaponize them. I let him go for 12 minutes. Then I stood up. "Michael," I said. The room went very quiet. He found me in the 3rd row, and I watched his face. I watched it very carefully because I had spent 4 months imagining this moment, and I wanted to be present for every second of it. I watched the recognition. I watched the calculation. I watched him decide in the space of about 2 seconds whether there was a version of this he could still control. There wasn't. "My name is Robert Callahan," I said to the room. "This is my son. 7 months ago, he used a fraudulent co-ownership scheme to steal my home and my retirement savings. He has done the same thing to at least 4 other people that I know of personally. I have documentation for all of it." I opened the folder on my lap. "I also have recordings." The room erupted, not in chaos, in something more like a collective exhale, the sound of 40 people realizing simultaneously that they'd nearly made a very serious mistake. 3 people in the back row, I would learn later, had already begun filling out the initial investment forms. Michael tried to speak. He said my name twice, "Dad, Dad," in a voice I almost didn't recognize, stripped of the charm, smaller than I'd heard it in years. "I'm not here as your father tonight. I'm here as a witness." The 2 officers who had been waiting in the lobby came through the door at 7:31 p.m. Henry had made that call too. I won't tell you it was clean. Nothing real is ever completely clean. Michael was arrested that night on multiple counts of fraud. The investigation that followed took another 8 months and ultimately turned up 6 confirmed victims, 2 more than we'd identified, and a paper trail that prosecutors described as extensive and deliberate. He had been doing this in various forms for nearly 7 years. 7 years. I sat with that number for a long time, tried to map it against my memory of him. Dinners, phone calls, holidays, the birthday cards he sent every October that I had kept in a box in the closet. Tried to figure out when the man I knew had become this other person, or whether there was ever really a difference and I had simply refused to see it. I don't have an answer to that. I'm not sure I ever will. What I do know is this. At his sentencing, 8 months after the arrest, I submitted a victim impact statement. I didn't write it in anger. I wrote it at the kitchen table of the small apartment I was renting by then. A decent place, 2 rooms, a window that looked out onto a neighbor's garden, and I wrote it the way I had always tried to do hard things, honestly and with as much care as I could manage. I wrote about what I had lost, not just the money, but the specific weight of realizing that someone you loved was capable of this. The way it changes how you remember your own past, goes back through every memory and makes you question it. The nights in the shelter, the $412. I also wrote about the other victims, about Patricia and the Warrens and Gus, about the 41 people in that Nashville conference room who came within a signed form of losing their savings. I did not write that I forgave him. I wasn't there yet. The judge gave Michael 6 years. I drove home in silence. I made a cup of tea. I sat in the chair by the window and looked out at the neighbor's garden, and I thought about Carol, and I thought about Danny, and I thought about a maple tree that was someone else's now, turning gold in someone else's October. Then I picked up the phone and called Henry. "It's done," I said. "How do you feel?" he asked. I thought about it honestly. Like something very heavy just got set down, I said, but I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do with my hands now. Henry laughed, a quiet, real laugh, the kind that only comes from someone who's known you long enough to laugh at exactly the right moment. I might have an idea about that, he said.
Henry's idea was a community outreach program. Through his firm and a partnership with a local senior center, he had been developing a financial literacy and fraud prevention initiative, something aimed specifically at older adults, who are statistically the most targeted demographic for exactly the kind of scheme Michael had run. He needed someone who could speak to people, who understood what it felt like from the inside, who had credibility and patience and the ability to sit across from someone who was ashamed and make them feel like they weren't alone. He asked if I was interested. I said yes before he finished the sentence. I want to tell you about the work because I think it matters as much as everything else in this story, maybe more. Twice a week, I sit in a room at the senior center. Folding chairs, fluorescent lights, a coffee urn that never quite gets hot enough, and I talk to people. Sometimes it's a group. Sometimes it's one person across a table, someone who drove 40 minutes to come in and is still deciding whether to say out loud what happened to them. I tell them my story, all of it. The maple tree, the shelter, the $412, I don't soften it because I've learned that the most useful thing you can offer someone who's been through something hard is the plain truth that someone else has been through it too and is still standing. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you love, you know that the loneliness is almost as bad as the loss itself. The sense that something has happened to you that normal people don't have to navigate, that you should have known better, that asking for help is an admission of failure. I try to be the person who makes that feel less true. I've helped 14 families recover documentation needed for civil claims. I've sat with 6 people, 6 who came in believing they had no options and left with a referral to legal assistance, and, more importantly, with the knowledge that what happened to them was not their fault. One woman, her name was Dolores, she was 72, she'd lost her savings to a phone scam, held my hand at the end of our session and said, "I just needed someone to believe me." "I believe you," I said. She nodded and didn't say anything else, but she squeezed my hand once before she let go, and I drove home that evening feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Useful. Genuinely, concretely useful. Not despite what had happened to me, because of it. I had spent 41 years running into fires to pull people out. I thought that chapter was over. Turns out, I was just between assignments. On a Thursday morning in February, about 14 months after the sentencing, I found an envelope in my mailbox with a Tennessee postmark. The return address was a P.O. box I didn't recognize. I stood on the front step in the cold for a long moment before I opened it. Something in the handwriting, careful, slightly cramped, the letters leaning just a little to the right, made my throat tighten before I'd read a single word. It was from Danny. My grandson was 9 years old now. He wrote on 3 sheets of notebook paper in the earnest, uneven cursive of a child who has recently been taught that cursive is for important things. He wrote that his mother had told him some of what happened, not everything, he was 9, but enough. He wrote that he didn't really understand all of it, but that he knew his dad had done something wrong and that it had hurt me. He wrote, and this is the part I've read perhaps 30 times since, that he had found a picture of me and him at a baseball game when he was 4 years old, and that he remembered that day, and that he still had the foam finger I'd bought him. He wrote that he hoped I was doing okay. He wrote that he thought about him often, and that he was proud of him for writing, because writing honest letters to people you love takes courage at any age. He wrote that I would very much like to go to a baseball game with him someday. Then I sealed the envelope, put a stamp on it, and walked it to the mailbox myself. I stood at the end of the driveway for a moment after I dropped it in. The neighbor's garden was dormant still,
It was February, but there were early crocuses coming up along the fence, purple and white, the first unreasonable optimists of the season. I looked at them for a while. Not everything that was taken from me came back. The house is someone else's. The money, though partially recovered through civil proceedings, will never be fully what it was. My son, the man I raised, the man I hoped he would become, is serving a sentence in a federal facility in Tennessee, and when I think about him, I feel something complicated that I don't have a clean word for and probably never will. But here is what I also know. I know that on Tuesday and Thursday evenings, there is a room with folding chairs and a lukewarm coffee urn where people come to be believed. I know that there is a boy named Danny who remembered a baseball game. I know that I ran into fires for 41 years and never once regretted it. And I know this now in a way that I could not have known it before any of this happened, that the most important thing a person can do is not protect everything they have. It's to keep doing what's right, even when what's right costs you something, especially then. Real family is the people who actually want you there. And for the first time in a very long time, standing at the end of a February driveway, watching purple crocuses push up through the cold ground, for the first time, I felt free. What would you have done?